Welcome, everybody, to the 25th episode of Comic DNA, on which we will be discussing the classic Spider-Man story, Kraven's Last Hunt, written by J.M. DeMatteis and penciled by Mike Zeck. First published by Marvel Comics in 1987. I am Aaron Walther, and my good friend Luke Thompson Moritz cannot be with us today for this episode, but we do have a special guest that is another good friend of mine, Mr. Tim Albaugh. Thank you, Tim, for being on the show.
No problem.
Tim is the creator of The Celestial, which is a comic that is on NewHavenComics.com. He's the creator of a number of the characters that go back and forth between Zero Heroes and The Celestial, like Quickspeed and some of the Aegis stuff. I can't be bothered to keep track of it all.
Not, I can't be bothered to keep track of the things I create either.
Yes. But, so, Tim, you've been a long-time friend of mine. And
yes, much too long.
Much too long. And we have spent many a year talking about comic books.
Yes.
Spider-Man in particular.
Spider-Man being the first comic book character I really got into as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely takes me back.
Yeah, Spider-Man was one of the first comics that I really got into.
It was definitely the first comic I started picking up, and it was because I guess 4th or 5th grade would have been when I started picking it up. And it was because of the 90s cartoon is really what got me into it. Sure,
I loved that cartoon. Yeah. I was way into Spider-Man. I knew other kids that liked Spider-Man. I mean, Spider-Man was popular.
Yeah,
really
Spider-Man
popular.
and the X-Men and all those Marvel characters were really popular when I was a kid. But again, I think mostly due to the cartoons that were out at the time. But, the comics also were really big.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and I read a lot of Amazing Spider-Man. I probably started collecting it in the mid-90s, but I was going back. I had gotten a whole set of issues from I can't remember if it was a cousin. Some older kid was just have a bunch of comics.
Right.
So my Spider-Man reading went back of many years before when I actually started reading.
Yeah, I started with this cartoon, and then I can very specifically remember the very first comic book story I picked up was right after the Clone Saga. It was it was a comic. It was the debut of the female Dr. Octopus. Do you remember her?
I do remember
and
that. I have that issue.
It was a storyline where Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and Ben Reilly, Scarlet Spider, had to go fight her to get some kind of thing to save Mary Jane because she had radiation poisoning because she was carrying Spider-Man's baby. And
yep.
That was the very first, and it's interesting you mentioned the you got Amazing Spider-Man because that storyline was spread out among Amazing Spectacular Web. So I got all of them because that's what they were doing at the time was dividing the stories in between all the different Spider-Man titles. So I bought a lot of Spider-Man.
Yeah, that was a thing. The crossing over of multiple titles, especially because in the '90s, Spider-Man was so popular. I mean, they had 5?
Yeah, it was Amazing, Spectacular, Web, and Adjectiveless.
Yeah, just
and then
Spider-Man.
Quarterly they had Spider-Man Unlimited.
Unlimited, yeah. So basically, they were putting out a new Spider-Man book every week, and they were coordinating the stories to run through every book. So you had to follow the story. You had to buy the new Spider-Man book that was out that week. Yeah, see that I have mentioned this before on the podcast, but I'm going to mention it again because it's especially relevant. But that is actually one of the things that made me quit reading comic books at the time.
And it really was terrible because I'm pretty sure each book still had a different artist and different writer.
They all had different artists and writers.
And they were all forced to write the same story, so there was always a jarring, abrupt switch in tone between all the books.
Especially with the art, because the art was all over the place.
Oh, it was. I remember specifically that it was a 3-part story, the one I was talking about. And one of the artists was, I think, John Romita Jr., maybe? I don't know. But one of the artists was good. One of the artists was really good. The other two artists were not.
Amazing Spider-Man had Mark Bagley on it for a long time.
He
was still doing Spider-Man at that point.
That might have been who I was thinking of then.
And that's why I bought Amazing Spider-Man.
Because I remember, I was a big Bagley fan.
I really liked Bagley's art. And he drew Amazing Spider-Man for a long time. I was especially mad because I liked comic books, and I would go to the comic book store and buy comics, but they would always have ads in the books saying, save money, buy a subscription.
Yep.
And so, I was like, well, why not? So I bought... This is when I was young and naive and not really understanding the way the world worked. I bought a subscription, a year's subscription of Amazing Spider-Man. Or maybe it was 2 years. It might have been 2 or 3 years, because I was just like, I'm just going to spend all my money right now and just get all my Amazing Spider-Man comics.
You got 1/4 of a story every month.
Yeah. I, as a dumb, like, 7th grade, 10, 12-year-old kid, I don't know how old kids are, but, as a dumb kid, I had no concept of what was going on.
It really was kind of a despicable marketing ploy.
It was terrible. And I remember, like, getting my first, like, Spider-Man issue in the mail, and I was like, and of course, the first one I got was, like, part 1 of a 4-part series, so I was like, this is so great, I am so excited.
I can't wait for next month.
And next month
was part
3.
Oh, part
3.
No,
next month was part 3, and I was like, they screwed up, they skipped an issue, and I was so confused, and then I was looking at the numbers, like, well, wait, no, the numbers, how can issue number 488 be part 1 and issue 489 be part 3? That doesn't make any sense. My little mind was blown. So I kind of figured out what was going on after a few months. So it's like I had my subscription of Amazing Spider-Man that would come in every month, but then I still had to go to the comic book shop and try and hunt down issues that I wanted to fill in the story, and I was so mad.
See, I remember the first time I bought a comic, I was real into it, because I was like, this is only part 1 of the story. Oh wait, but part 2 and 3 are already here, so I'll just grab all 3 of them right now, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
But then, I didn't have a lot of money to spend as a child, so it got to a point where I had to really ration it, and then the art thing. Like I as a kid, I always hated it. I was like, why is the art so good in this one, but so terrible in this one?
Yeah, and I don't think it's. I think it's pretty wide consensus among fandom that was like the lowest point mainstream comics have ever been.
Yeah,
and I think that the industry has ups and downs, but like that was just. I mean. That was the period when Marvel declared bankruptcy because it was a mess. But I guess what's interesting to that and how that ties into Kraven the Last Hunt or Kraven's Last Hunt is that Kraven's Last Hunt was a big deal, and it was a crossover originally when it was published. But that was still there was still something that was so clean about it, the way they were doing the Kraven's crossover.
Well, what I liked about it was they said they wanted to do it because they didn't want a story where Spider-Man was dead and buried, and then you could go read another Spider-Man comic and he's swinging around fine.
Exactly.
So, I mean, like you said, that was actually a good move for the story at the time.
That was a good move because we're also talking. This was published in '87, so that was Jim Shooter's Marvel, and Jim Shooter was a tyrant compared to the way most people talked about him. And he made a lot of editorial mandates, and he really kind of ran everything with an iron fist. But he got books to ship on time, which is a good thing. Right. So yeah, one of the things that they said when J.M. DeMatteis, as I understand it, just from the research that I've done, when he pitched the story to them, they said, we'll just cross it over across all the books, because like you said, you're not going to have him dead in one book and then not dead in another book. But the reason it was still I guess it's just so quaint, because it was just a 6-part story. They just did it for 6 issues, crossed over between all the books, and then everything just kind of went back to normal.
Right.
And it was still DeMatteis and Zeck, their story.
Right.
It wasn't like they were just handing it off to another art team to do part 2 and then another art team to do part 3.
Right.
So it was still there was still some concentration and some care taken to making it a complete story, which is why I think it works well as a graphic novel.
It does. It was a fast read. I got through it in 25 minutes.
It's a really fast read. Yeah. I read it as a kid and I really liked it. And this was rereading it the first time, and I just blew through it. It's a fast read because, well, there's a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of it's just imagery. I mean,
yes, yeah.
There's a lot of internal monologue, but there's not a lot of dialogue really.
Correct. No, there's no dialogue in this story because it's all it bounces back and forth between Kraven's internal monologue about what's going on with him, and then Peter Parker's internal monologue about what's going on with him.
And then it goes to, it's also got Mary Jane's and Vermin's.
And Vermin, yeah. It's all internal monologues for all these characters. Yeah, so I guess before we start talking about the story, we'll go through the story, let's just kind of give just a summation of what Kraven's Last Hunt is. Cool. Summation of the plot synopsis. In case there's anybody out there who is not familiar with one of the most famous Spider-Man stories ever.
Sure.
But essentially, what it is Kraven decides to go on his last hunt for Spider-Man. He kills Spider-Man.
Beats Spider-Man very easily.
Yeah, like...
Spider-Man's lucky Kraven wasn't taking him so seriously the whole time.
Exactly. Like, it's, like, completely effortless. He just, like, destroys Spider-Man, and then Kraven decides he's going to become Spider-Man, and he starts wearing the Spider-Man costume and going around and just, like, violently beating up criminals. Like, really terribly beating up criminals.
It's a much better version of the Superior Spider-Man.
You know, it's funny because
in fact, I think he calls himself the Superior Spider-Man a couple times.
That's
in the
actually
book.
I had just assumed that the recent, like from last year or the year before, the recent Superior Spider-Man book was just like a straight homage to Kraven's Last Hunt. It had to have been,
yeah,
because like you said, that's the story where Dr. Octopus becomes Spider-Man,
right? And
he goes off to prove that he's a better Spider-Man than Peter Parker,
and he does it by being more edgy and
violent. And it's like, that's exactly what Kraven's Last Hunt was. And like you said, Kraven even calls himself the Superior Spider-Man. Right. He says, I'm going to be the new Spider-Man, I'm a superior Spider-Man. So yeah, Kraven takes on the role of Spider-Man, and then he captures Vermin, who is like a mutant rat man.
Rat man that apparently Spider-Man couldn't beat by himself.
Yes,
he needed Captain America's help.
Yeah, this was a villain that was introduced not too long before Kraven's Last Hunt, and Spider-Man and Captain America beat up Vermin, and so it was a really tough villain for Spider-Man because he needed Captain America's help.
Right.
So then for this story, Kraven beats him by himself to prove that he's better than Spider-Man, and he captures Vermin, and then Spider-Man. Like, issue, like, 5, Spider-Man, like, bursts from the tomb.
Yeah, because it turns out Kraven didn't actually kill him. He just, like, used his mystical potions
yeah, they really gloss over that.
Sedate him for 2 weeks.
Yeah, he kept him in, like in a coma for 2 weeks somehow, in a coffin underground. It doesn't matter.
It's comics, suspension of disbelief.
Yeah. And so Spider-Man, like, comes to, kind of, like, realizes what's been going on, and he goes to confront Kraven, and Kraven, like, is just like, no, I'm done. I beat you.
I won. You can beat me up if you want, but I'm not going to fight back because I won.
Yeah, the purpose of this was to just prove that I could have killed you if I wanted to, and now you have to live with that. That's pretty good villainous. Like, I like that as a character trait for the villain. Like, and then, like, what he does is Kraven has Vermin captured, and he releases Vermin so that Vermin can beat up Spider-Man, and then
he has a weird, like, epiphany that Spider-Man's a person and he's a good guy, so he stops Vermin from killing him.
Exactly, yeah. He, like, realizes that Spider-Man is not the Spider. He's a man. So he stops Vermin from killing him and then just lets Vermin go, and then Kraven commits suicide.
Right.
Blows his head off with a shotgun. And that's the end of the book.
That's the end of the story.
So it's I can see why it's a classic Spider-Man story, but one of the things we like to do on this podcast is to look at everything in historical context. And this was one of those things I didn't really like yet as a kid. But, like, looking at it now, with hindsight, like, this is such an obvious, dark, gritty 80s comic.
It's definitely something that came out in the wake of The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen.
Watchmen, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, this is, like, I almost feel like this is one of those comics that, this is definitely, I don't want to, like, I don't want to say that it's like ripping off Alan Moore's style, because I don't think that's the case.
No.
I do think, though, that this is one of those books that, like, it was very much following the style. Mm-hmm. Like, it was very much in line with what everybody wanted at the time.
Like, it was definitely, like, I mean, it was really dark, and, like, it was really dark. It was, like, almost against type for Spider-Man, because there's even a part where, like I mentioned, before we did the podcast a couple days ago, I mentioned that there's, like, no jokes in it. Like, Spider-Man doesn't do any wisecracks. Right. And there was a point where, like, he cracks one wisecrack, and then in his internal monologue, he's like, stupid jokes, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
What's the point? And it's all like...
He's super cynical and depressed. Yeah, it's
wearing
like,
the black costume.
Yeah, it's, like, not Spider-Man at all.
Right.
Like, it's just funny because, like, people hold this up as, like, one of the greatest Spider-Man stories of all time, and I mean... it's weird because it's not a great Spider-Man story.
Right.
It's a great Kraven story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good Kraven story.
It's a really good. I mean, Kraven's very, very obviously the protagonist.
Kraven is the protagonist, exactly. When you actually break it down, because I mentioned this to somebody before, just some random person who like doesn't read comics anymore, but I just brought it up that we were going to be reading Kraven's Last Hunt, and he's like, "Oh, that was always my favorite Spider-Man story." And I said, and I kind of made that comment where I was like, it's not that great of a Spider-Man story, but it's a really good Kraven story because it's about Kraven. And he his jaw dropped. And he's like, "Oh my god, I never realized it, but that's why I love it so much."
Right? Because I wouldn't Kraven's the protagonist. I wouldn't even say Spider-Man's the antagonist. I would say Kraven's concept of the spider is the antagonist.
Is the antagonist, right? Which that's kind of what the story is about. The story is about identity, and Kraven perceives Spider-Man as the Spider, who is this embodiment of...
Like, he blames the spider for everything bad that has ever happened to the human race.
Exactly, yeah. He's like the embodiment of this, like, evil prey that he can't defeat. And he's Kraven the Hunter, he can capture any prey. But, so that, like, really bothers him, of course.
Right.
It's a story about, like finding the man inside the costume,
right.
Which that's kind of that's what you said just a minute ago,
right?
But I think that's like one of the things I like about superhero comics. I've always said that you really only need two. There are two like essential traits to make something a superhero story a genre. Number one, it's a morality play. It's superheroes are about morality, and number two, they're about identity. Because superheroes are almost always, like in modern times now, we're actually getting away from this. Which is actually a problem I have with most modern superheroes.
Right.
But like the secret identity, right. All superheroes have like a dual identity of somebody who they are and then somebody who they are secretly,
they pretend to be,
or
right.
Somebody that they pretend to be. There's always some kind of duality going on, and that conflicts with the morality. And that's definitely what's on display in Kraven's Last Hunt. Like, because even like Peter Parker, like. He's afraid he's going to lose himself because this is the most horrific thing that he's ever gone through, this traumatic experience. And, you have the Mary Jane story of, Mary Jane... Because they just recently got married after this issue.
Like, I think there's even a scene where she's waiting for Peter to come so they can move her stuff into his house.
Yeah, it's like right after. So you have this, like, this theme of identity and, what is a person at their core, because not only is that about Spider-Man, like is he the crime fighter, is he the monster, or is he just a man, and then you have Kraven going through the same thing, like is he a hunter, is he like a nobleman, is he just like a stupid peasant, because he talks a lot about the Tsar and, exactly.
How his parents came from,
like how they're aristocrats,
right, and they went crazy after they had to come to America and became poor.
Exactly, yeah. So I do think what I like about this book is that it sort of does bring all the necessary elements of a superhero story together. But boy, it is such a book of its times.
Right. And like we talked about how it wasn't even originally supposed to be a Spider-Man story.
That is correct, yeah. Like
it was originally supposed to be a story about Wonder Man and his brother the Grim Reaper.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that. I had read something. Originally he wanted to propose it, or originally DeMatteis wanted to propose it as a Wonder Man series, in which Wonder Man was buried and ultimately crawls out of the grave.
Right.
But then he pitched it as years later. He pitched it as a Batman story, exploring what would happen if the Joker actually killed Batman.
Right.
And that makes total sense.
It definitely had that feel.
It definitely had that feel.
It felt like, although, like, it would have been kind of an inversion, because I definitely feel like the conclusion that they came to in this is that Spider-Man, that Peter Parker is the real person and the spider is the mask, whereas obviously they hammer home the fact in Batman that Batman's the person and Bruce Wayne is the mask.
And they also, it would have been, I imagine a Batman story would have been more focused on, like, Joker getting depressed because he doesn't have Batman,
right?
And like he essentially just like killing Batman is what makes him like become a normal person because now he has no reason to be the
Joker. I actually read that the original story would have been about the Joker becoming sane because Batman was dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I mean that's it would have been its own story,
right?
But when you read this, you read Kraven's Last Hunt, like it reeks of a Batman story. Like the way he talks about Batman, or I mean, the way Spider-Man is presented in this book is very more in line with Batman,
and the way
Spider-Man.
they keep calling him, the way
the Spider
was, all
instead
Batman's
of
villains
the
call
Bat.
him the Bat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean even the what's the poem?
The Blake poem.
Tiger burning bright.
And they changed it to Spider, which I thought was kind of cheesy.
It's a little cheesy because like.
It's like, we can quote this poem, but it's about a tiger, so let's just change the word to spider and nobody will know.
Right. I mean, I get it. Like, it sort of works because, Kraven, he's always talking about the jungles,
right.
So,
That was another thing, by the way, where you're talking about how it's following the line of Alan Moore. I mean, that's very much like Watchmen would end with, like, a music quote from, like, a song or a poem or whatever.
Oh, it's an allusion to, like, another work of art, or of a classic.
And, every chapter of Kraven's Last Hunt ended with a different line from the Blake poem.
Yeah. So, which is funny. That's actually that's the kind of the other ironic thing. We're talking about how this is kind of, like I said, in the wake of Alan Moore style comics, and the reason it got rejected as a Batman story was because it was too similar to a Batman story that they were currently working on, which ended up becoming The Killing Joke.
Oh, a little Batman story you might have heard of.
Yeah, just kind of like, I don't know, one of the most famous Joker comics of all time. But I actually say I probably like Kraven's Last Hunt more than The Killing Joke.
I think I do too.
It feels like it's even that we talked about how like Peter Parker. He doesn't really feel like Peter Parker in this comic. Like it's. Like he just doesn't do a lot of like classic Spider-Man stuff. Like he's not funny.
And I mean, it is out of character for him, but they gave him a good reason to be acting like that. The whole almost dying, buried alive thing.
Like it was supposed to be a big deal. Like this was supposed to be.
Event.
Yeah, it was a traumatic event. It was him at the complete brink at the edge.
Right.
Like, and I get that, and I think it works. But I definitely feel like Kraven's Last Hunt still feels more like in line with the characters than The Killing Joke did. I don't really like The Killing Joke that much, and I know that's blasphemy for some Batman fans, but Alan Moore doesn't like it either, so whatever.
Right.
It looks great. Brian Boland is an amazing artist.
Right. It really is just kind of a so-so Batman and Joker story.
Yeah, it is.
Everybody talks about the big thing that came out of that was the Oracle getting shot.
Right.
But I don't know.
It's that's such a that's such a contestable thing too, because like a lot of people don't like that because
it doesn't make sense in a universe where like people are getting healed and
exactly
there are Lazarus pits that can bring Ra's al Ghul back to life, but we can't give this woman her ability to walk back.
Right.
So she has to stay in a wheelchair and be a hacker instead of Batgirl.
Yeah, that's a podcast for another time. But yeah, no, I think Kraven's Last Hunt is better. I think it actually works. I think it works really well.
I think the story definitely works better I think, like you said, the biggest benefitee of the story is Kraven. I think the story worked better for Kraven than it would have worked for the Joker or the Grim Reaper or anybody else.
Absolutely. Now, so here's a question: did you like, or do you like Kraven as a villain? Like before you read this story?
As a kid, I thought Kraven was the most boring Spider-Man villain of all time. I did not. It's interesting that you said that you read it as a kid.
Yeah.
As a kid, I always went and tracked down all the big Spider-Man stories. Like I tracked down the death of Gwen Stacy, and I tracked down Maximum Carnage, and I tracked down Venom's first appearance, and all that stuff. But and whenever anyone would mention Kraven's Last Hunt, I was always like, ugh, Kraven, he's just a boring jungle man that fights Spider-Man. I don't care. So I would always skip over it. And I think as a kid, I actually would have probably really liked Kraven's Last Hunt, but I just never bothered with it.
Yeah.
So, but no, I mean, now I think... Well, actually, I don't know. Now I think Kraven is an interesting character, but most of the time I think about that, it's because of Kraven's Last Hunt.
Yeah.
Before that, I don't really know. I mean, before that, I mean, Spider-Man even kind of jokes about it at part in the book when Kraven first catches him. He's like, "Oh, here we go. Now he's going to come up and start hitting me with his fists, and then he's going to take me to his hideout like Dr. Octopus, and I'll just figure out a way to beat the crap out of him." And then Kraven pulls out the gun, and then Spider-Man's like, "Oh shit, he's going to shoot me."
So that was actually something that really stuck out to me. Like, I mean, again, I don't want to keep going back to this but like the whole like in the wake of Alan Moore, like deconstruction of superheroes,
right? Like
that
Spider-Man,
was like straight up. Spider-Man was freaking completely self-aware of the absurdity of superheroes.
Right.
Like, it was Spider-Man saying, like, Kraven beat me up, now he's going to tie me up, and then I'm going to have to escape out of a trap. He's going to explain his plan, but, oh, that's the twist. It's for real this time.
It's always for real this time when the villain pulls out a gun.
Exactly. He pulls out a gun, and Spider-Man's like, a gun? That's not your style. Like, tries to, like... I guess that's maybe kind of a joke that he tries to do.
Well, yeah, because he
tries to insult him.
He calls him Cravey. He's like, Cravey, you don't use guns. Kapow!
Kapow! Yeah, and it's like, oh, it just got real.
Right.
Like, it is dark.
Because I think right after that panel, the next image is Spider-Man in the coffin.
Yeah, and it's like, the jokey, fun-loving Spider-Man you used to love is dead.
He's dead!
Actually dead!
He's dead! He's in his costume, and he's in a coffin, and Kraven's got a bunch of guys in suits, and they're gonna bury him, and...
It's funny because as a kid I loved that, and even as like a teenager I really loved that.
Right. Well, as a kid it's like, yeah, this just got real. It's dark.
Exactly.
I mean, as a kid I always say that my favorite heroes were like Spider-Man and then like the Punisher and Daredevil, Ghost Rider, and all the grim dark. Evil is cool and good guys are cooler when they're almost evil.
Right, the classic anti-hero.
Right.
Yeah. But I find myself, as I grow older and my tastes mature, or possibly decompose, I'm not sure.
It's hard to tell the difference.
I find myself increasingly bored by decompression and meta storytelling.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I thought it was amazing, because it was like, oh my god, it's like layers, and if you read it one way, it like makes sense, but it's also talking about, this thing outside of the story.
Right.
And like, now it's all just so obvious. Like, it's all the same.
Well, it's just because, I mean, that's just like anything else. Like, Watchmen came out, and it was all gritty and grim and real, and everyone's like, oh man, this is awesome. And then everybody did that, and then it got a little old. And it's like meta stuff is going crazy these days. Like...
That's the thing. I guess that's the thing, is because, like, I thought by now most people would kind of be feeling like me, and you're just kind of, like, sick of it. But it's, like, more popular than ever, like, meta jokes. So, whatever. I'm not one to rain on anybody's parade. I'll let them have what they want. But I get increasingly bored by it. So yeah, like, when I reread that scene of Spider-Man, like, joking about, like, the way things always are, and then the shocking twist that it's not. I don't know. It certainly didn't have the same impact on me as when I first read it as a kid.
And yeah, I think as a kid that would have blown me away, but when I was reading it now, it was almost, I mean, it wasn't quite an eye roll moment, because I mean, it's well written.
It was well written. I guess that's the thing too, like, what we're talking about here is just sort of like the overall, like, style and the tone of what they're going for.
Right.
I do think it's really well written. I think DeMatteis is a good writer,
and I'm sure it was a huge shocking moment back then.
Absolutely,
especially that it was happening in a Spider-Man book. Although, I mean, this was also like post Venom when who. Like,
well, this is not. This is pre Venom. This is post symbiote. Yes.
Okay.
This is because what happened was they did the symbiote story, and he got rid of the symbiote, but then he just decided to keep the black costume for no reason.
And this Venom stuff didn't happen right after that?
No, Venom shows up later after this.
Oh,
yeah.
Well.
So this was like, that was the whole, like, actually that's one of the things, I liked that period of Amazing Spider-Man comics. It was really good, and I liked the way the series, if you kind of read it all as a whole, it really does kind of build up to the whole Venom thing.
Right.
Of, like, the series gets really dark, like, you have Kraven's Last Hunt, which is, like, really dark, and you have this weird mix of, like, dark 80s, but with the romantic Peter Parker, Mary Jane getting married and kind of like being happy together mix. And
Spider-Man was always better at doing the dual life, I think, than a lot of other
exactly. And that it just sort of seems like at that time everything was just like went to the extremes.
Right.
Like in the 60s, Which, as an adult, having gone back and read all of the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko Spider-Man comics, those are actually now my favorite Spider-Man
those are
comics.
great.
Those are fantastic. And I like the Romita stuff also, but Ditko will always be the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you know, it's his book. Like, every great villain, every great rogue villain in Spider-Man's Rogue Gallery was created by Steve Ditko. With the exception of Venom. I would say Venom is the last piece of the puzzle, the last character archetype that got added to Spider-Man's Rogue Gallery.
Todd McFarlane, right?
McFarlane was drawing the book, and
was it DeMatteis?
No, it was Dave Michelin.
Oh, okay.
But the thing is, like I was saying, Venom was just later that year,
right?
First,
okay, so that completely changes my whole perspective because I thought Venom started the whole dark thing, but
no. Venom was the conclusion of the whole dark thing.
Really, really kind of cool.
I agree. Like I said, if you were reading which I mean, I wasn't reading the books monthly at the time, but like I said, I had a whole bunch of them, and I just read through them all, and it really builds into the whole Venom thing really nicely. Although one thing, by the time they bring out Venom. Venom was Todd McFarlane drawing Amazing Spider-Man at that point. I know he had to have been. I'm pretty sure
that McFarlane was responsible for the character design, if nothing else, of Venom.
Yes. I can't remember if he was actually drawing the issues at the time. I mean, I could go look, but I'm not going to.
Right.
I think he was. And to that, I have to say, as a kid, I really, really liked Todd McFarlane.
Well, yeah, I think we all liked Todd McFarlane as a kid.
We all liked Todd McFarlane as a kid. But going back and rereading Kraven's Last Hunt, I really liked Mike Zeck's
the pencils.
The pencils in Kraven's Last Hunt.
They're fantastic.
Mike Zeck is really good. He
drew one hell of a Kraven.
His Kraven looked great, and I shouldn't say I'm surprised because I guess there's this weird thing where all the people who got really popular in the 90s, art-wise, most of them, not all, most of them didn't really hold up to the test of time. But it is my opinion that most of the popular artists before then all do hold up to the test of time.
Yes.
And I think Mike Zeck is a good example of somebody who was drawing a really great Spider-Man.
There are a couple panels that are there's a obviously the big iconic scene of Spider-Man coming out of his own grave.
Correct.
He did the covers for the issues too, right?
Yes.
That cover picture of Spider-Man coming out of his own grave is a really phenomenal picture.
Yeah,
it's really great.
Really good.
And there's also another picture later on when Spider-Man's in the sewer and he and Vermin are colliding.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good picture.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing, that really helped sell the tone of this book. Like you said, it's all imagery and internal monologue. So
the whole thing took place at night, didn't it? There are no
there's no day sequences. It's all at night. It's such a dark 80s book.
Right.
It's such a dark 80s book. But yeah, it's really good looking, and it's just kind of funny to think about it in the historical sense of it. Just 6 issues later, Todd McFarlane went on his legendary run on Amazing Spider-Man, and wow, I mean, Todd McFarlane certainly added a lot to the Spider-Man franchise, but I do not think it holds up the way Mike Zeck's Kraven's Last Hunt does.
Right, yeah, and a lot of Todd McFarlane's artwork where it became a joke for him to spin as much webbing as possible.
Yeah,
he had a thing with that. That kind of carried over to Spawn, where it was became a joke to draw as much cape as possible.
And it's this gets said a lot, but it's such a case of style over substance.
Exactly.
There's a lot of style.
I mean, he came to prominence at the same time as what's his face. The dude who created Deadpool.
Rob Liefeld,
who was also definitely style over substance, because his art was terrible.
Rob Liefeld is he's been the industry's punching bag ever since he grew to prominence.
Right.
But yeah, but McFarlane really was kind of one of the he was sort of the guy that spearheaded a lot of the new wave of artists. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. I think he's a good artist.
I
think he's a good artist. It's just not as clean.
Not near as clean, no.
Yeah, and I think that's what really makes Kraven's Last Hunt
Kraven's Last Hunt looks like... it looks like art.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like art.
Whereas this looks like...
With a capital A.
Right. This looks like comic strip.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, and it's not bad, but it's definitely, like you said, style over substance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Spider-Man putting his leg up over
wrapping his leg like he's Weird Al or something.
Doing freaking yoga while he's swinging.
Yeah. But even just like, I don't know, just looking at like the panel layouts compared to like the panel layouts in Kraven's Last Hunt.
Right. I mean, some of these you can't see it because it's podcast, obviously. But some of these panels are just like awkward and squished. Yeah. Whereas it was obvious in Kraven's Last Hunt, everything was. I mean, Kraven's Last Hunt felt meticulous.
It felt meticulous.
Every panel was there for a reason. It was laid out exactly the way it was supposed to be. It was drawn.
Yeah. Honestly, like I say, keep going back to this but like this is definitely a book that was made in the wake of Alan Moore's rise in stylistic prominence. But this book feels. Like, the reason I don't like calling it a ripoff is because I actually think it's really well done. Right. And it's not like somebody who's just saying, oh, they want dark and gritty, let's give them dark and gritty. This is somebody who is as meticulous about this comic. This comic was made with as much like care and precision as any Alan Moore comic was.
Like, I mean, it came during a time when that was popular, but I mean, like, it came at the right time, I think.
Exactly, yeah.
It was a good story that came along. It was in the right place at the right time.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, that's probably, I think that's the reason why it's remembered as like one of the greatest Spider-Man stories, because, like you said, right place, right time. It gave the people what they wanted when they wanted it. Right. I was gonna say, I wonder how well like this kind of story would play like in different periods of Spider-Man's history. Right. Like it did, because like we say, it is such an 80s book, you know.
Although I feel like that every so often, it's like
they always go back
every 5 years or so they do a Spider-Man story where he has to get real, like like, you know, that one that came out a couple years ago after Civil War, where Aunt May got shot and he made the deal with Mephisto and he went and pulled out the black costume because it was time to get serious again.
You know, I completely forgot about that. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
You are welcome, sir. You can suffer with me.
Yes. Yeah.
Every so often they try to do a dark Spider-Man. And like even more recently, Superior Spider-Man was them trying to get dark and gritty. Yeah. And then right after it was over, they brought back Peter Parker, and it was all, let's be fun and swashbuckling again.
And I mean, that's just the nature of the cycle. Right.
It's the nature of ongoing, continuous stories that have been going on for 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's just what's going to happen. I guess... another thing, we haven't really talked about the character of Vermin.
That was another character I wanted to talk about. That was a really interesting character to put in the story. I mean, like, I don't know, it takes another level of suspension of disbelief to believe that this is like the ultimate Spider-Man foe that Spider-Man couldn't beat.
Yeah, I agree. Vermin, well, especially because, like, you know for a fact, like, you have the historical context to know that Vermin is not held as, like... Vermin is not a character that's well remembered as one of Spider-Man's greatest foes.
Because, I mean, even when people talk about Kraven's Last Hunt...
They talk about Kraven.
Nobody talks about Vermin.
Right.
And like, even in the story, it's just like they talk about Vermin, and he's just some thug that Baron Zemo created, and then Captain America and Spider-Man beat the crap out of him.
Right. And now he's like a chud living in the sewers. And he just
of course New York's gonna be bad while you think about the pimps and the chuds.
That's when the chuds came at me.
But yeah, like, he lives in the sewers, he's friends with rats.
Yeah, like he could like talk to rats, he like controls
the rats. Them. Yeah.
I agree that the character, the whole like greatest foe thing, or maybe not greatest foe, but just like most difficult foe that Spider-Man ever faced, kind of feels that's sort of like...
See, that was the thing, is like I said before, I thought this was a post-Venom story. So I was always like, why didn't Kraven go beat up Venom? That would have made it really cool.
That would have made it cool.
But Venom wasn't around.
Venom wasn't around, right.
That answers that question.
The thing is, though, I do think that from purely craft standpoint, Vermin actually is... like a more perfect villain to have the story than Venom. Yeah. Because Vermin is struggling with the whole identity thing. Is he a man? Is he a monster? And all his internal monologue is all about him confused and conflicted,
sort of remembering his past life, but not really.
Exactly, like he's sort of a man between worlds,
right?
Right, and that's what Spider-Man is and that's what Spider-Man and Kraven are.
Right, that's kind of. I didn't think about that because when I was thinking about Vermin, I actually didn't like the character, and I was thinking, oh, this is a really good example of a stupid dark '80s character. But when you put it like that he's like the balance between what Spider-Man is and what Kraven is,
right?
That actually works really well.
Yeah. So, like I said, from a craft, like the craft of the comic, I think he's perfect, right. And I think that's Vermin is necessary for the story to work the way it is,
right? And the reason, now all this stuff's coming to me. Like the reason Spider-Man couldn't beat him is because Spider-Man was too much of a human, and the reason Kraven could beat him is because Kraven let himself be consumed by the spider,
exactly,
and just beat the shit out of him,
exactly.
So yeah,
that's why Spider-Man, like Spider-Man had sympathy on him. On Vermin. Kraven had no sympathy for him because he saw Vermin as just some prey, monster, right. Prey. And Spider-Man had sympathy on him and was like trying to appeal to his humanity while they were fighting. And so again, this is that whole the whole identity and the duality of man. And I thought Vermin played into that perfectly,
right? And
when we talk about why this comic is so great, it's not because it's dark, and it's not because it's gritty, and it's not because it's a deconstruction of superheroes, but it's really well crafted. Mm-hmm. And I think it delivers, as I said, the essential necessary means for a perfect superhero story.
Right, the morality play and the duality.
And the duality of identity.
It really does play right into that.
So that is kind of why it's always been one of my favorite Spider-Man stories, even though it's such a weird Spider-Man story, because it's not a Spider-Man story,
But I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like, a lot of the best stories, a lot of characters are when they kind of go against type and kind of,
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I also think that it's, when you have a long running series or you have a character that, that becomes a vehicle for different types of stories,
right.
I think it's okay to let this story be about Kraven.
Right.
And Spider-Man is more or less, he's not a prop, but he's not the focus.
Right, and I think it's really telling that Matthias?
Mattis, I think is how I pronounce it.
I never know how to pronounce it, but I think it's really telling that he obviously had this story, and he wanted, he shopped this story around, and it was obviously a story that was really important to him, and the story's more important almost than the characters in this instance.
Absolutely, yeah. Which is kind of... Yeah, I agree. The story is more... the story is bigger than the characters.
Right.
You could substitute almost any superhero and that hero's villainous counterpart into this story.
Right.
Not perfectly. You could move things around a little bit, but any superhero would pretty much fall into this story because it's about that superhero-supervillain relationship.
Right.
That whole, good, evil, hunter, prey. The whole, what's the word I'm thinking of? The whole, the frenemies style of being an arch enemy. Because they even have that scene where Kraven is, being really, tender with Spider-Man.
Right, he touches him. He's like, oh, does my affection embarrass you?
Yeah, but there's just, this subtle nod that, Kraven feels so many different things about Spider-Man. Right. It's so beyond just, he doesn't just hate it. It's kind of weird, because
it almost feels like you said, it's very meta. It's almost like Kraven totally gets it, almost like the whole book. Kraven gets what's going on the whole time, and then Spider-Man's just lost the whole time,
right? Because he's a comic book character,
right? Because he's still a comic book character, and it's just short of Kraven going, oh, I know what's going on here. We're comic book characters, and let's see what happens if we mess around with the type a little bit.
I think what really makes me appreciate, I'm just so glad Kraven didn't give a speech about how they're destined to just do this throughout all time,
the Joker does every time him and Batman
exactly.
each other.
Yeah, I'm so glad that they didn't go down this whole we are just representations of good and evil, and we take many forms, and blah blah. I just get so sick of hearing that.
Of course, there's a reason Kraven wasn't able to say, "Oh, we're gonna keep doing this forever," because Kraven's last hunt and all.
Kraven's last hunt, yes. But no, I think it worked really well. It also worked really well as a final Kraven story,
right?
Which that becomes another thing because of course Kraven is still around in the comic books today.
Yeah,
despite
you can. Yeah, I mean, death in superhero comics, we all know how that goes.
Right, exactly. And I don't,
He stayed dead for a while.
He actually did, because throughout the 90s, the 90s was that era when they were...
Because, it's like, in Spider-Man, usually when characters died, it stuck for a while. Like, I mean, even Norman Osborn was dead for like 20 years before they brought him back. Before they really effed him over.
Yeah, because, like, for a long time, it's like they were trying to find a replacement for the Green Goblin.
Right.
And, Kraven stayed dead. Because, like, in the 90s... they were trying to bring in all the replacements for all these old characters.
Right, because Kraven's son became the new Kraven.
They had Kraven Jr.
Right.
They had like a third or a fourth Green Goblin.
Right, and they had like girl versions of all the villains.
Yeah, the girl Dr. Octopus.
Because then Dr. Octopus died and the girl Dr. Octopus... Yeah, they really did a whole thing where they killed off villains and tried to bring in replacement villains. And then they just gave up and brought all the old villains back.
Which I don't think was a bad move, because, I mean, let's face it, these characters they're just stories.
Right.
And they're just representations of myths and archetypes. Mm-hmm. So, Kraven as a character, returning it to be in Spider-Man, I don't really have a problem with it, but I do think that this is basically the perfect last Kraven story. Right. Even if, you read new stories with Kraven in it and whatever current continuity is going on, this will always be how Kraven dies.
Right.
This will always be how Kraven dies. He commits suicide after beating Spider-Man.
Right.
That's just the way it is. I don't care if this happened 30 years before whatever's happening now. You don't think about it in a linear timeline.
Which is also another interesting thing I read about. You mentioned the suicide thing. This comic actually got a lot of flack for... a lot of people thought it glorified suicide.
Right. Well, because... I mean, Kraven is he's talking about how he finds peace,
right?
And he's
happy.
Completely calm and serene.
Well, nothing else to do here.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that, but I think that
to the point where they actually had to do a sequel.
Yes,
where Spider-Man confronts Kraven's ghost, and Kraven's ghost isn't resting because he committed suicide.
I read about that. I have not read it.
I haven't either.
I have no interest in reading it.
Well, I mean, it was just them trying to backtrack and say, the suicide wasn't glorification of it.
I can see why people would read this as a glorification of suicide. People who have no concept of art and story and Kraven is obviously a disturbed individual,
right? I think the recurring arc phrase in the story is they say my mother was insane.
Insane, exactly.
So the whole thing is Kraven's obviously insane too. He thinks he's fighting a gigantic spider ghost at one point in the story.
Exactly.
He eats spiders and drinks poison to become better at fighting Spider-Man, who he thinks is some kind of mythological reincarnation of all the evil that has plagued his life.
Right. Now, if you want to do something about how Spider-Man feels guilty that he couldn't save Kraven because Kraven just committed suicide to solve all of his problems, that's fine.
Right.
But that's fine. But I don't like this idea that you have to
go back and apologize
for it. You know what I mean? People commit suicide. It happens, and usually they're dealing with some mental issues.
Right.
And
I don't understand why every character in every story has to be a perfect paragon of virtue.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to.
Craven's the bad guy. He does bad things,
right.
And you can't.
He's the protagonist.
Well, yeah,
but he's not a good guy.
But he's right. Yeah. He's a villain. He's a villain protagonist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's not the person that children should be emulating.
Exactly. If
not
nothing
that this
else,
is a story for children anyway.
Well, it's not. But I do think that if nothing else, the story goes out of its way to show that Kraven is the bad guy, Peter Parker is the good guy.
Right.
That's why Kraven was impressed. The whole reason he let Spider-Man go is that he's impressed by Spider-Man's humanity.
Right.
And he suddenly has this epiphany that
Spider-Man isn't this evil thing that he thought he was. He's a costumed adventurer.
Yeah. There's a man inside the costume.
There's a good man.
Yeah, a good man.
I think there's a point where he's there's a man behind the costume, and he's a good man. I think is what the
because he says something specific about a good man would never let vermin run free.
Right.
So that's what you're going to do because you have to do that because you're a good man, and that's just what's going to happen. And Peter Parker's yeah, I can't, don't talk at me in riddles,
I've been buried alive for 2 weeks. I don't got time for this crap.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I can see the criticism because, like, the story ends with Kraven, like, at peace with his own insanity, and that's how he decides to end it.
Right.
But, you know, that's... The takeaway from the story should be that, like, Peter Parker is the one you emulate.
Right.
You know, clearly the takeaway from the story
I mean, it's like someone saying, well, I can't believe they printed Joker killing all those people, and that's not the way children should behave.
Exactly.
Some kid might read that. Think it's cool. It's
yeah.
like, no, the Joker's the bad guy.
The bad guy, yeah. It's, again, morality lessons.
Right.
Like, the morality of this is that Kraven is crazy, and it doesn't have the... like the goodness in him to be a good person,
right?
And it's like I said, it's a good story. It's a really good story, and it fulfills everything I want out of a superhero story.
Yes.
Yep. Pretty much. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers Kraven's Last Hunt. It's too bad Luke couldn't be here for this.
It would have been interesting because, I mean, like, you and I are both lifelong Spider-Man fans.
Exactly.
And it would have been interesting to get an outside perspective on that.
Really would have liked Luke's outsider perspective. And also, not to, like, pick on Luke or anything, but he's been wanting to read this one for a long time. Because he's never really, like, he's only familiar with Spider-Man through, like, movies and, you know, video games and stuff like that. And It
would have really been interesting to get an on Spider-Man's fans' perspective on this one, or someone who's only familiar with the video games and the movies, because it's a very different Spider-Man than the one that's in Kraven's Last Hunt.
So, maybe we'll have to do another Spider-Man book at some point and get Luke's perspective on that. Maybe we'll do like a little like asterisk and like ask him about Kraven's Last Hunt while we're doing that. But until then, we'll just have to wait.
Yep.
But thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Comic DNA. You can find new episodes of Comic DNA at comicdna. I'm sorry, I don't remember. Podbean. Yeah,
that's really
you can
good.
You can find new episodes. Luke always does that part. Luke's the one who gives the Podbean link. You can find new episodes of Comic DNA at comicdna.podbean.com. We're also on iTunes. If you search Comic DNA, we'll show up on iTunes. You can find comics that I have written at newhavencomics.com. You can also find comics that Tim has written at newhavencomics.com. And I am Aaron Walther. You can find me on Twitter at AAWALTHER, at AAWalther on Twitter. And I am also on Facebook. I am probably one of many Aaron Walthers on Facebook, but I'm the comic book one. Yeah. Thank you everybody for listening. Come back for the next episode. We are going to continue with our super mainstream superhero sellout theme of episodes, and we are going to be talking about Superman Red Sun. That is the Elseworlds book by Mark Miller about if Superman landed in communist Russia instead of good old Kansas, America. It's an interesting book. We're going to have 2 returning guests on that episode. Mr. Greg McCrary, you may remember him from the episode about Scud the Disposable Assassin. And we're going to have my good friend Josh Blasingame come back just a few episodes ago. He recorded Fear Agent with us, but he's going to talk about Superman Red Sun. So, thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you all next time.